Here's today's First Word Daily Devotion.
Here it is, March the 1st, and we're beginning to end the first quarter of the year in our Bible reading. And we made it this far in our reading, all the way to Leviticus chapter 19 and 20. And notice this repeated theme in the Bible. We have the Lord speaking to Moses, saying, "Speak to all the congregation of the people of Israel, and say to them, You shall be holy, for I, the Lord your God, am holy." And then look at verse 5. When you offer a sacrifice. Now, there's a repeated theme all through the Bible, but especially encapsulated here in the book of Leviticus, and that is, you are to be holy. And holy, of course, means to be set apart. And of course, and remember this, the way that we are set apart is through atonement. That is, the way that we're set apart comes through sacrifice. Notice again, I want to point out for you in verse 7, we see the third day again as a reference. But notice this phrase that's repeated, I am the Lord your God, I am the Lord your God, I am the Lord your God. It's all repeated through here. And then we come down to verse 33, and we have this blanket statement. When a stranger sojourns with you in your land, you shall do him no wrong. And then the basis again found in verse 34, I am the Lord your God. But notice all these blanket statements. All of these broad statements are all based upon the Exodus, based upon what God has done. Our response is to be holy. And we understand through New Covenant lens, through what Christ has accomplished for us on the cross, through the once and for all sacrifice of Jesus Christ, that it's not so much a response, it is entirely a response. Our holiness is a response to what He has accomplished in our life. Just to point out a couple of facts for you again, in chapter 20, we're mindful as we read about offering our sons and daughters to Moloch and the punishment that comes. Remember this, children have always been and always will be precious in the sight of our Lord. As well as we come and as we look at chapter 20, we see this language of setting my face. That's a new kind of nomenclature for us. This is what it means to be opposed by God. God sets His face against. But then notice this as well, something for us in particular in our age that's inundated with so much pornographic material and nudity. Here we see in chapter 20 that nakedness is a disgrace. And I wonder if we have the same appropriation when we think about nakedness, if it's a disgrace. But then turn over to our reading in Mark chapter 7. And before we go into Mark chapter 7, again, just to mark out from our Old Testament reading today in Leviticus 19 and 20, remember that salvation means holiness. Remember that we are saved to be holy. And then look what happens here in verse 24 of Leviticus chapter 20. God sets before the people an inheritance. He puts in their minds the future that He has guaranteed them through His salvation. And what's coming for them is better than anything that they can leave behind. Now, turn over to our New Testament reading today, Mark chapter 7. Mark chapter 7, notice the specific language. Notice the language of the Bible. Jesus says in verse 5, why do your disciples not walk, the Pharisees asked Jesus, why do your scribes not walk, listen to the language, according to the tradition of the elders? That's specific language. It's not according to the commandment of the Lord, it's the tradition of the elders. And Jesus takes this opportunity to quote Isaiah and say this language. This people honors me with their lips, but listen, their heart is far from me. In vain do they worship me, teaching as doctrines the commandments of men. And then Jesus says this, you leave the commandments of God and hold to the traditions of man. And look down in verse 14. He called the people to Him again, said to them, hear me, all of you, understand. Look at this statement and compare that with what we've read so far in Leviticus and see if it's true. And it is. There is nothing outside a person that by going into him can defile him. But the things that come out of a person are what defile him. Verse 19. Verse 18. Do you not see that whatever goes into a person from outside cannot defile him, since it enters not his heart, but his stomach, and is expelled? Verse 21. For from within, out of the heart of a man, comes evil thoughts, sexual immorality, theft, murder, adultery, coveting, wickedness, deceit, sensuality, envy, slander, pride, foolishness. All these evil things come from within, and they, according to Jesus, defile a person. So here Jesus shows us the intention of the law. We're able to see the intention of the law, where the Pharisees might have thought that it was to have these traditions, to have the outside cleansed. Only Jesus can cleanse a heart. And we have this beautifully exemplified, don't miss this, in our March reading here in Mark chapter 7 with the Syro-Phoenician woman who comes to Jesus and asks him to perform a miracle on behalf of her, to give her, this little puppy, a blessing. And we turn our attention finally this morning, or today, whenever you're listening, to this beautiful prayer in Psalm 56. We close with, again, the assurance that the atonement of Jesus Christ brings us by saying, when I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. And then we turn to verse 9. This I know, God is for me. In God whose word I praise, in the Lord whose word I praise. In God I trust, I shall not be afraid. What can man do to me?